Hello and welcome to the Dirtbuzz. I'm Dale Spangler. Before I get started with this week's episode, I'd like to give a shout out to new patron of the Buzz, Scott Boyer. Thank you, Scott. Your support helps keep the buzz rolling. And like Scott, if you too have been enjoying the show, please consider becoming a patron of the Buzz for as little as $3 per month. And on to this week's episode. This week, my guest is a former powersports industry product developer who helped create products for industry heavy hitters Fox Racing, Alpinestars, and Shift MX before he relocated with his family to Bend, Oregon, where he founded his own online retail shop, Atomic-Moto.com, where he focuses specifically on the dual sport, adventure, and trail riding off-road segments. Brian Price, welcome to the Dirtbuzz. What are you up to today?
Dale Spangler, I am all about you today. That's what this is.
Yeah, you took one for the team. You have an AC issue going on, and you turn that thing off, and you're going to sweat your ass off just for this podcast.
I am sweating both literally and figuratively over this.
Well, how's things going with Atomic-Moto, your online retail business that focuses on adventure riding? How's that going, man? Seems like it's got to be going crazy right now. I mean, obviously motorcycling in general is going nuts. Adventure probably even more so. So yeah, how's it going?
It is going well, and for strange reasons. It's always been steady and solid. I run it carefully and cautiously. But COVID actually was a big boost, which was quite a surprise. And in fact, when COVID first started to hit, I kind of panicked a little bit. I talked to some of my friends back in Italy. I talked to Alessandra and asked her how the situation was over there. And it was pretty dire. And I thought I was going to leave a big smoking crater in the ground. And about 2 months after, business spiked, and it's stayed up ever since.
And how about keeping inventory? Because I feel like that's the thing I've heard the most from pretty much everyone, whether it's OEM or aftermarket, is just that production cycle's gotten longer, whether it's just one little snag in the process. And so I think a lot of brands are scrambling to get product and get it fast enough because of that, wide open space that we're in right now with growth.
That has been a challenge. But every problem is an opportunity, and that's certainly one of them. And there's snags throughout the process. But if you have a few brands, like if you're talking to a vendor that has one particular brand, you're talking basically to one brand, they may be taking it on the chin. But if you're a retailer like me, you have multiples. And so maybe some of them are surging, doing a little bit better for inventory, and some of them are struggling a little bit more. And those things tend to sort of balance out. And then it just helps to be more tactile, more hands-on the business, and to frankly have to hustle around a little bit and look for inventory. If I see something that's available, I grab it. I'm pretty up to speed on what is coming in and what isn't. And so, like I said, every problem is an opportunity, and this one has been an opportunity to me to interact with the customers a little bit more and show them that you're actually trying to help them get their stuff. And obviously they respond really well to that.
Yeah. Now, as a result, have you had to take on some new vendors, some new products? Because, like brands like, I think of High Sun. I had Greg Blackwell on who ran, was one of the top guys at Parts Unlimited for a long time. He was recently hired by High Sun as a business development manager. So basically he's trying to open up new dealerships. And so these kind of like second and third tier OEM brands, all of a sudden they're getting attention. So I assume it's probably going to be the same way it is the same way with a lot of these, second and third tier aftermarket brands. So just curious how it's been for you as far as, are you looking for new products to have those second and third backups in case you can't get, I'll use Garnet as an example, because I just watched one of your videos on the new Garnet Dakar boot, which we'll talk about. But so, I mean, I feel like do you have more second and third tier brands, or because you specialize so much on ADV, maybe not? So I don't know. I'm just curious about that.
I've added a few and dropped a few. I try to stick to brands that don't just have good product, and by good product, I'm pretty finicky about that, but actually have sort of the operational end of things figured out also. And there are lots of brands out there that are very widely distributed, and they don't need another retailer. But there are some brands, for example, 60 Helmets, which I took on recently, which is a very technical product. There's a lot to it. There's a lot of technology to understand and to be able to communicate to the customer, a lot of work to fit them over the web or over the phone. And so brands like that I have added. And frankly, the other thing that I'm doing is I'm sitting tight a little bit, but I'm starting to work on adding a bunch of product for an e-bike and mountain bike site, Atomic MTB. So that's in the works.
Cool. Yeah, that's definitely exploding. I went into my local shop here, Carl's Cycle, recently, and I just was blown away with how many e-bikes they had in there. I mean, they had the Gas, they had the Husqvarna, they had Intense. I mean, they had, I want to say maybe only 3, but they had bikes everywhere. So it was just, it felt like the whole dealership, experience is changing with respect to that. So good for you, man. So you're going to jump on that thing sooner than later.
Yeah, thank you. I hope breaking in any new market is always a challenge, and you have to make sure that you see the lay of the land before and when you enter. And the nice thing about it, obviously, is it's something. All of the products I sell and pretty much everything that I do with the business is sort of selfishly motivated by me, and I'm kind of the target demographic. And that part of the bicycle industry looks really fun. It's something that I'm really interested in. I like the idea of having a little bit of extra boost to my aging legs, and it just looks like it's growing like crazy. It just looks totally fun. And any time you enter into an industry when it's in that phase, just the kind of energy and the vibe of it is really uplifting, and that's what keeps you going through the day.
Yes, you said that's going to be a whole new site you're going to launch, huh?
It will be both. I'll add some of the product to the existing site, but I'll probably build out another one also. I don't really know. The idea of best practices for that kind of thing is unclear. Most people tend to just add more product to their site, and I don't think that's engaging to the customer. I think that people that are shopping online for more premium technical products are looking for information, and they're looking to relate to people that understand on a slightly deeper level what they're doing. And so I think sometimes if you just see a broad product line added to a site, it's great for SEO. There's a lot of reasons for it, like I said. But if you're trying to be more altruistic to the whole industry or the whole process of the sport, the idea of being a little bit more focused and speaking to them in the right language, that appeals to me. Well,
that's something I think you're naturally good at just because of your background, which I'd like to dive into here in a minute, but and talk about kind of how you got to this point where you started Atomic-Moto, because you have a huge amount of history with some iconic brands, as a product developer, and I would imagine that comes through in your ability to be able to break down and explain products, like the video I was just talking about. I watched it before we came on. You're talking about the new Garnet Dakar boot that you have the exclusive on. And I was just listening to you talk about it. I'm like, this is a guy that knows product. And so on that note, how was it that you got into product development? So you grew up in Connecticut. I think that's correct, right?
It is.
Yeah. I was like, because I know you went to Connecticut, the college in Connecticut, but I was pretty positive you grew up there. So you went to college, get a BA in marketing, business admin, and then how did you break into product development? Because then 1991, you go to work for Fox Racing on the cycling side, right?
Well, it is always a long path.
Yeah.
And there's this line that I've had in my head for about 10 years, and I've been wanting to drop on the public, and I get to drop it here. I am the Forrest Gump of the motorcycle industry. And what I mean, I'm 100% serious, and I don't care if the self-deprecation doesn't bother me. have had more good luck. I've been a behind the scenes guy, and I have seen more cool stuff, had my hands on more cool products, met more cool people in the motorcycle industry than just about anybody that you can imagine. I have been so damn lucky in this career that sometimes it boggles my mind. My start was the classic kid. And this is another reason why I like to say I'm the Forrest Gump. I mean, I was that kid in the 5th grade that would run out of the store when he heard a motorcycle or a gearhead car go by. And I was just obsessed with it at a really young age. And so at a certain point in high school, I was starting to veer into a bad path, and I had a work experience program teacher who was a great guy back in Wallingford, Connecticut, named Mr. Kushner, and he set me up with a part-time job at the local motorcycle dealership. And that was pretty much the only career path that I had ever wanted, and I think it was the only one that would have worked for me. And being from Connecticut, like many people, you know, you look at California, read about California, you see the stickers that say Cycle News East. We don't care how the hell they do it in California, but we really did. You know, I wanted to move there. And so in 1988, I just packed up and moved. And I had no plan, no job, no nothing. Landed out there, and I bumped around at a dealership for a while. And then I met a couple people who worked for Fox. And Fox was in a unique stage at that point in time. They were transitioning from the father, Jeff Fox, owning it, to giving a lot more responsibility to the kids, Greg and Pete. And they were both pretty young. I think that Greg was 21 and Pete was 19, I believe. And that was back in 1991. And they hired me as a purchasing assistant there. And it was very much a right place, right time thing. I'm a pretty motivated guy. And I was, you know, I loved the work. I loved the company. And they actually gave me more responsibility than I probably would have gotten if I went into a more developed situation, more developed company. And so I moved up pretty quickly from purchasing to product development to product manager and so on.
How do you get, I mean, how does someone, I mean, you have a marketing and business degree and then you go into product development, but how do you even learn that? Is that something that you just kind of have a natural aptitude for products, you know, for how something's put together? Because that always just kind of blows my mind. I recently had on a next podcast is a guy named Scott Boyer, who unbelievable story. Yeah. So he helped create the Pro Taper handlebar, helped create the HRP flak jack, helped create the Scott plastic boot, and helped create Smith roll-offs. And it's like, he's a marketing guy. He's not like an engineer or anything. And he was kind of the idea guy behind these products. And so that always just interests me when someone like you have a marketing and business degree and you go into product development and you're really good at it. So I'm just curious to know more about that. Like, how did you pick that up? Was it on the job experience, or was it just something that you just were naturally good at?
No, it is something that I have a talent for. You know, I'm not, some people are good looking. Some people can sing really well. Some people are athletic, and some people are natural born marketers such as yourself. And I'm not, you know, a lot of my personality is wired toward what you have to do to be a good product manager, which is to worry about what you don't know about, worry about the unknown, to never take yourself or your products too seriously, to really compare what you have to your competitors. And there's a sort of element of granular thinking, or I used to call it component thinking. You know, you have to break down everything into its separate components and try to quantify how each one of those separate components is proceeding along the development cycle. Look for strengths and weaknesses and opportunity for optimization, and then kind of document it all. And it's a really different skill than being a marketer, and totally different frame of mind and approach. And it just suits me well. I'm a little bit, as you know, you're being very kind not to say it, but I'm a little bit curmudgeonly. And I have a little bit of that Connecticut attitude in me. And that kind of suits it well also. That's helped me a lot in dealing with vendors and negotiation, being a little bit more forceful and things like that.
Yeah, insisting, right? Because I feel like when you have something in your mind, you need to be able to insist on, this is what we need to do, and so that does take that kind of stronger personality, it seems like.
It does. You have to maintain the relationship because like someone who's making your food for you, if you over negotiate with a vendor or you piss them off or you don't give them the chance to operate their business efficiently and successfully, you end up having to jump around. There's consequences to that. And so there's an element of relationship management to it, but it's really creating a structure and making sure that everybody is on the same page on how that structure is, and then moving the product through the development cycle. And there's different aspects to it also. I guess there's a sort of marketing facet to it in the merchandising. I like to call it product positioning. When you have different items, especially in the motorcycle industry, you have lots of different riders. And people using their motorcycles, using their bikes in lots of different ways and sometimes in different places. And the ability to kind of suss out what each person is doing and what their needs are and what addresses those needs well, and kind of cataloging them all in a sort of three-dimensional sense in your mind on your kind of mind's product positioning board is another thing that has just worked really well for me. I just have an ability for it.
Yeah, and plus managing people, obviously, is a huge aspect of it. I think I saw where you've managed at Fox, I think, and Alpinestars, you were over 20 people you were managing, right, on your team. I mean, that's that in and of itself is, that's a lot right there.
It is, but that has had fits and starts to it. There's a learning process to that. I didn't have, obviously, a degree and a lot of background in management. And, here's a good story about that. I actually went to work for Fox in 1991. They had about 27 employees, I think, pretty small. In
total?
On Dell Avenue in Campbell.
That's crazy now when you think about how big they are now.
Absolutely. I think they were about $5.5 or $6 million in sales, and they had a good little gig going. Jeff had built a really nice, solid company. And as the company grew and, I did well with product development and purchasing, there was a point where I started to hire people to work for me, and they were my age, and quite experienced, and they had a lot of skills and abilities, and they were great guys. And I remember at one point I was starting to have little struggles in my day-to-day job. And this is one of the best things that has happened to me in my career. It's one of the luckiest decisions that I've made, because I don't take credit for being smart. But I had a guy who was kind of a Silicon Valley dude, and he was a mentor. And I was talking to him about it, and just off the cuff, it mentioned some discussion I had with one of the guys. And he said, "You know what? You sound like someone who's bumping up against the Peter Principle, which is really common in the tech industry." And he went on to explain that to me, where, people who are highly motivated and have a particular set of skills get hired in the beginning stages of a company. And then as it grows, you need to bring in people that are more professional. And the two are very different. Some people make the transition from one to the other, but sometimes making that transition has some challenges. And in a lot of companies, there are other managers around to help you through that transition. And in the motorcycle industry, especially a small company like Fox was at the time, that wasn't the case. And so I kind of took what he said to heart, and I got a little bit nervous. And I had a friend who worked for another company as a product manager, purchasing manager, named Bob Bitzer. He was a fantastic guy. And he worked for a competitor. And so we would talk a lot, and it was the kind of friendly, being coy, trading little bits of information, but not too much.
Yep.
And I started talking to Bob and telling him, "Hey, these guys here, Greg Fox, he really wants to hire you." And then I would go to Greg and say, "Hey, that guy, Bob, he really wants to leave Answer. He really wants to work here. He wants to talk to you about coming to work here."
Nice.
And I'm not kidding you, hand to God. And I did that for about 6 months. And as it turned out, they hired Bob and brought him up from Southern California, and he took over my position and took over the employees that I had. And I willingly did that because at the time, Fox didn't have any mountain bike gear. We had dabbled in it a tiny bit, but they didn't really have a focused mountain bike line. And so my reward for that was Greg put me in charge of developing a whole line of mountain bike gear. But on top of that, setting up the marketing, setting up the advertising, doing some sponsorship deals with the Diamondback team and the Cannondale team. And that actually ended up with us getting a bronze medal, I think. Bronze or maybe a silver in the Olympics, and a nice little shot on NBC TV in the 1996 cross-country Olympics for mountain biking.
Yeah, I think I read that. I was surprised. I didn't realize that, like that was a cool little fact that I came across. I was like, oh, I'd never heard that story before. So super cool.
And the coolest part of it was they treated me, first of all, I need to kind of go off on a little tangent about the Fox family because I love that family. That they are such an amazing group of people, and I'm not patronizing them. Jeff Fox is one of the greatest guys in the motorcycle industry, probably the best. I haven't met anybody, so I can't say. That guy has done so much good stuff for so many people. Treated me so well, taught me so many things. I can't say enough good things about him, and the rest of the family I have a fantastic appreciation for also, and that could be a podcast, a story unto itself, just their kind of early days and all of the things that they went through and the depth of their character. But back to what I was saying, one of the cool things is they didn't just say, hey, you can do this mountain bike project. They actually set me up with kind of a rudimentary P&L. And so I had to make a sales forecast and a budget and figure out the profit margin on the products that we were selling and how we're going to distribute them and so on and so forth, hire employees. And that had to all come out of the budget. And that experience is really important. If any of you are aspiring entrepreneurs, that is an invaluable experience, because when you get that ability to look at how your decisions affect the sales, the cost, the budget, the final profit, it completely changes how you think and how you make decisions, in particular with athletes. And that was a real eye-opening. It was an eye-opening thing. I'm at a loss for words for how much that lifted my game.
And that was something that you were kind of like, in a way, it was almost like an exercise that you were given, like, here, if you want to take this cycling apparel, project on, you got to start from the very beginning and kind of go through that entire process. So yeah, like you said, it really does probably make you stop and go like, oh my gosh, like making this change could affect it down here on the profit margin or whatever, So there's so many different facets that go into it, and it's got to be even more complicated now. Like I've had multiple people on now that are on the product side like yourself, and they're like, the cycle's getting, in some ways, it's getting a little more difficult because of, some of these sources where you get one snag in the cycle and then the whole thing's slowed down. So I think it's got to be difficult, to go through that process these days, but I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's the same.
No, you're exactly right. What you're describing is how the actions that you take have effect and consequences and fit into a much, much larger process. And when you have that, you go from that ground level bitching about why can't we just do this to having the 10,000 foot level and understanding how all the pieces fit together. That's how you basically transition to being a manager, right? That's how you're looking at the results of your work, not just the work on the ground.
So then at Fox, was that primarily like one of the main things you did then, was that cycling project probably the biggest thing there? Were you doing like motocross gear and stuff when you first were hired?
I had a couple of other big projects before that. When I went there in 91, they had taken some blows. They had just lost Damon Bradshaw, who they were really excited about. They promoted the heck out of him. And he went and signed with AXO for the unheard of at the time amount of $750,000 for 5 years. And they were pretty burned by that. They had a pant line that they had two levels of pants. One solid color pant that was they had moved to Korea, and those actually were recalled. And then they had the famous zebra and barbed wire pants. And my memory of those is quite a bit different than the general public. They were made by Yoko of Finland, and that material that was used for printing the zebra and the barbed wire patterns on, that was a polyester. And man, when it was on the rear of the pant, on the front it would do it too, but when it was on the rear of the pant and you sat and moved around on the seat a little bit, after a short period of time, the coating would delaminate off of it, and they would fall apart. And we had a bunch of warranties with the first pant. We had a bunch of warranties with those. They had a boot at the time called the Chameleon that was made by Alpinestars. It's a pretty clever design Pete had come up with, and it had logos in the shin plate that could be changed, so you can change the color on them. And when those were made, they'd pull the little logos that inserted into the shin plate out of the mold and pop them in there. Well, they were still warm when they did it. And so those little logos would pop out and land on the ground.
Oh, no.
And so we nicknamed them track sprinklers because you'd get your Chameleon boots, and by the time you did the first lap, there'd be an F, and then 100 feet later there'd be a head, and then another 100 feet later there'd be the X. And so they had taken quite a few little punches there. But they were, Jeff was really, really solid. He just never, ever, ever gave any sense that he just knew how to run the company. He just knew how to make it all work. And so they could take those little blows and keep going. And that was the beginning of them deciding that they wanted to move away from Yoko. At the time, pants were made by Yoko or Sinisalo. And what you did is you come up with your graphic design and you send it off to them, and they would adapt your graphic design to their patterns. And everybody had pretty much the same level of product quality and the same innovation. You couldn't really come up with anything that unique. You didn't have control, right? And they really wanted away from that, in particular because they had a bad experience with the sublimation printing on the 90 and 91 pants. And so we moved the production to this company in the Far East by the Nike model. Phil Knight's thesis when he was graduating, I think from Stanford, was to make a high-end running shoe in a lower-cost country of manufacture. And that doesn't sound sexy, but it's a great business strategy if you can execute it well. And me being the kind of micro manager, product detail wise that I am, man, I tore into that project and just kind of went through every single seam and logo and piece of fabric on that until it came out. And that was the 1993 360 pant. And that pant was the beginning of Fox pivoting to its current iteration. That thing it looked great. It was at a little bit lower price point than other manufacturers out there. It was at $139. We started getting a little bit more attention from readers. Pete really stepped up his game for advertising, and that's when the Dream On ad came out. And so that was a big project for me and a big win. And I had a lot of other projects also. I mean, I think it was myself and Greg helping out with product development also, Pete doing a little bit of it. But I was really kind of working the whole line. And so there were lots of things for me to get my hands on. I didn't have a mentor, but I did have my hands on everything. I had it on, jerseys, gloves, pants, chest protectors, boots to some degree. And so my experience with those things just really blew up.
I see, that's a really cool story. I had no idea that you were kind of on the forefront there of that first iteration of their pant that wasn't through, like you're saying, it was back then it was either Cinesalo or Yoko. And I remember Scott Boyer saying the same thing, because like the HRP stuff was all Yoko stuff, And so, yeah, kind of like the floodgates probably opened after that, right? Because then all of a sudden everybody probably started doing, overseas sourcing, whether it was China or Vietnam or some of these other countries, whatever was the hot one at the moment. But pretty cool story. Yeah. I mean, is that pretty much, that was the start of it then, huh? Like everything being made, sourcing, your pants from somewhere else besides Yoko and Cinesalo.
I don't know for certain if it was the start, but it was by far the biggest commitment, and no one to that point had hung their high-end pant design on that strategy, and it was complicated to do. It wasn't a fully developed process with the vendor. I mean, for example, the following year, this is one of the things about product development that, there's always something coming along to bite you in the ass and you don't know what it is. So you're always looking for that next thing, trying to make sure you head it off before it happens. The pants had logos that had a plastic frame around them, F head X with a foam fill in behind them. And for some reason in 1994, the supplier for that plastic changed the compound. I don't know what he did, but they all cracked. And they would crack in the bags. They'd crack after they were used a couple times. And there were a lot of little things like that were me learning the hard way, and Fox learning the hard way. That, thankfully they were patient with me, and there wasn't really a good way to foresee those things. But we were the first one to do it. It wasn't easy to do. I put a lot of work into it. And so we had a pretty good head start on other companies. And the other thing that played a really big part in that was, they were young, and we were all young and super aggressive and super focused. And it was the epitome of like a race team or a sports team. And all we wanted to do was beat frickin' Axo. And it was just
game on
a daily. Yep. And it was just, that was our goal.
Especially after they stole Bradshaw from you, I mean, that had to definitely hurt. And that's crazy to me that like he is making that much money, but I'm not, in some ways I'm not surprised, because I feel like sometimes back then, I think some of the racers probably made more in some cases than they do now. But I mean, obviously like a guy like Roxon or, Webb, I mean, I'm sure they're up in the millions these days, but still 750 back then, that's a lot of money for gear.
It was a lot. And I don't think that it paid off for them, because I don't know how far into the contract it was, but he melted down. And, so I don't think that they got the full value. I don't know how it played out. I wasn't a part of their, I don't know. I knew some people from their company later, and they were heroes to us. Their designs. Kenny Safford was a genius, and they were just brilliant. And so they were a good competitor to focus on, because they were just firing on all cylinders. But that one kind of bit them.
So then that's Fox. So you're cruising along, and then 1997, what happened? All of a sudden you're going to Alpinestars, because I never heard the story of why that's how we met. For those listeners out there. So Brian and I met at Alpinestars in Italy, in Oslo, Italy. So yeah, I was the first American over there. And then I think you and your wife were the second, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Crazy.
I said earlier, I got to touch everything on the bicycle side, and the product line took off. People responded to it really favorably. We went from selling about, I think 5,000 or so pairs of gloves overnight to 70,000.
Wow. And now it's everywhere,
and now it's everywhere. And people just welcomed their brand. It was well known enough by then, and mountain biking was kind of, really in a growth phase, and they loved the brand. It just worked really well. So it took off. And I had done a few ads actually. And I had some other people that worked there lay them out for me. And that was really Pete's territory. I I was really stepping on his territory. And my way of thinking at that young age, hey, this is my project and I'm going to run with it and it's going well, so leave me alone. And probably the more mature way of looking at it was that it had to be integrated into the company overall. You know, it wasn't just a separate little side project. It had to fit into everything else they were doing. And so as that process was happening, you know, Pete was saying, hey, we need to do this, we need to do that. I was pushing back on it, and that was creating some friction. And there was one product that I had been working on for design, and it was kind of my baby. It was a special short that took a lot of inspiration from a motocross pant. And he took over the project, and so I pitched a fit and I quit. And we went back and forth a little bit over, you know, trying to keep me there. And it was all pretty reasonable, but at the end of it, they just said, look, you know, this is going to evolve. This is going to change. And so, you know, you're not going to have all of this responsibility and all this freedom. And again, my more mature self looking back on it, which is, you know, my hindsight especially is 20/20 and my foresight isn't always, but looking back on it, that was probably the right decision. It was the right decision. But I basically quit in protest. And I had dealt with Gabrielle from Alpinestars quite a bit on the boot project and the cycling shoe project. And I knew that he wanted to hire me, and I didn't exactly know why, but I knew he kind of did. And as it turned out, he wanted to start an apparel division. He had a few pieces of clothing that they had just grabbed from random vendors, but he didn't have a full-blown apparel program. And so I went to work first for him as a cycling sales manager. And he had a company meeting at one point, and I went over to Italy for that. And just in the course of that 2-day meeting, you know, so there was so much talk about product, which is my first love. I just said, hey, I want to work for you in products. And he said, okay, then you're moving to Italy. And
I love the sound just like
I do a really good Gabrielle. and so you know, like my stomach kind of hit the floor, and I went back to the hotel that night and I called my now wife, who was my fiance, and I said, can you believe it? He wants me to move here. And he goes, she says, let's go. So, you know, I wanted to impress her. So I went in the next day and said, yeah, let's go. And that was in November of 97. And I think you were there already. Is that right?
Yeah, I think I ended up there. I want to say it was either like the end of July or first of August. I think it was the end of July, because like not less than maybe a week after I was there, I was heading to the Czech Republic with Davide. So yeah, I think it was the end of July.
I went over there for the meeting in the middle of November, and then I flew back there in the middle of December, or beginning of December, pardon me, to kind of work out all the details and the deal. And I went back to the U.S., moved my fiance out of her apartment, me out of mine, sold her car, put my truck into storage, packed up all of our stuff, got married, and I was in Italy working on I want to say the 11th of January. So from idea, and that's a very Alpinestars thing.
Whirlwind.
Yeah, it's and we need to start a support group, Dale. But
refugees of Alpinestars.
That's right. You know, but it was the most intense 60 days, and I landed there, and I'm telling you that to anybody that's listening that doesn't know, Gabriele, the owner of Alpinestars, brilliant guy. The hallmark of him is his unfathomable determination and motivation. And so basically he's fired up and has big dreams. And I landed over there, and he wanted a product line by the fall. And I shit you not, there was one Mac computer in the corner, and no designers and no employees and no vendor list and no nothing. And just no infrastructure. And that was the most intense. I mean, basically it was kind of like, a futile effort, but let's do the best we can. And I did pretty well. If you looked at the results of the product line that I popped out, it would not be impressive, but the work that went into it was just insane. And so that's how I ended up there.
Now, were you working on street and moto simultaneously? Because I recall, like not long after I was there, going to Loretta Lynn's, like kind of helping get Alpinestars into Loretta Lynn's, and wearing Alpinestars moto pants. So I couldn't remember if you were behind that or if you were primarily just only focused on the street side of things.
No, that was me. It was the whole line. It was moto, which I was familiar with, so that was easy. That product was a lot easier for me to actually get. And you had a prototype of the Techstar pant. I remember that well. And I think you just barely beat Todd Hicks in your race, right?
Yeah, I think so. Like it was like Todd Hicks and no, it was what was his name now? Andy Boyer. Like he was kind of there helping represent Fox with Hicks. And so he was kind of like their ringer in that, and it was an industry race, like a bunch of industry people just all lined up. And I just actually told this story on one of my podcasts because I just remember it got like really way too serious for just an industry race. I mean, it's like,
and I remember two things. This is two comments about Dale Spangler. I remember two things about that particular time. One is that you came back and you hadn't ridden in a long time, and I just remember that you said, "Yeah, I beat that fucker in the industry race." And I don't remember if it was Todd or Andy Boyer, but we were all really surprised because that was just a side of you that doesn't come out. And you're such a laid back guy. That's a side of you that doesn't come out. And the other thing is one time you and I went on a lunchtime mountain bike ride, and I was not in good shape, but you were really not in good shape. And we went over to the corner bar and then turned up the hill to Oslo, and you gapped me by about 150 feet. And then we proceeded to both. I mean, I couldn't catch you, and I was so pissed because I remember thinking, I'm going to catch this guy. And I would gain on you a little bit, and you'd look back. I realized that there was no way that I was going to beat you. You have that competitor's fire, and I don't have it. But I was riding the mountain bike a lot, but I was not going to beat you. That was going to be your day no matter what, because that's how you wanted it to be. You remember that?
I vaguely remember it. I just remember like the times I either rode mountain bike or motorcycles, it was just boulders and rocks everywhere. So it was just absolutely horrible. But I don't remember that Sufferfest much, but there must have been a little bit of my, remnants of my fitness left over. That's the only thing I can think of, because I think Italy to me was the downward spiral for me gaining weight because of all that damn food over there, profiteroles and everything else. Holy shit. You know what I'm talking about.
I do. It was a lifestyle that you had to sample, you had to enjoy. And there's a genetic factor to them that I don't have. I can't. Some people over there could, eat all of the food and not have any consequences to it, and I couldn't. I have to struggle with it a little bit. But it was not your fitness that beat me, Dale. It was your drive. Let's be clear.
I was probably dying. I just wasn't willing to give up. Yeah, probably. You're right.
You were dying, and I was dying trying to beat you, and there was just no way. I remember I was partway up, and I remember this fucker's going to beat me, and I was not happy with that. I
kind of wonder if some of that, you're talking a little bit about that sort of competitiveness that you felt at Fox, like with Beat Axo. So then when you came to Alpinestars, I wonder if you kind of brought some of that with you, because I can see that sort of getting me a little fired up. We're going to Loretta Lynn's with the Alpinestars, and, like Fox is already there. We got to beat the Fox guys. And, so it's just like, it seemed like we kind of helped, I don't know, I guess motivate each other a little bit.
Well, the reason for that is because we were expats living in a foreign country. And that's a tremendously difficult thing to do. None of us spoke the language, and there are all the challenges of figuring out small things like how do you pay your phone bill, right? Where do you get groceries, or how do you go to the doctor? All these little challenges, and partway in, I had a baby. We had a child over there about a year and 2 months in, I think, not too long after we went. And the nature of being an expat, it's challenging. It has all of its challenges, but there were a bunch of us, and we all kind of hung out together and did a bunch of kind of silly stuff. I mean, there wasn't as many things to do because the language barrier just wasn't, you couldn't go to the movies, you couldn't go to the bookstore, couldn't really watch TV. I remember you had the Matrix DVD, and or I think you were there when we had the Matrix DVD. Basically, they'd have parties on Wednesday night where they'd play the Matrix and they'd change the language to a different one each week. So they're watching it in like French one week and Japanese the next week. It was just
they had the English nights, right? Because I remember going with like who did I go with? I don't know. We would go. Was it on Wednesdays, right? Like English night. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and then we'd pick a town on the map. I think I remember doing that. We were like, let's go here. Like we'd go to Verona or something like that, and just walk around. And
it was fun. There was a lot of road tripping and a lot of exploring, and it was a good group of guys. It was pretty fun.
So you made it I made it not quite 2 years over in Italy, and then you guys made it almost 4, right? So wow, that's almost twice as long. Along the way, what was probably your favorite thing that you helped develop while you're at Alpinestars?
That's easy. Yeah. If you are a street rider or especially a road racer and you have gloves and the third and fourth finger, the pinky and the ring finger are joined, that was my invention. That was something that spun out of I met a bunch of riders over there that had this problem that was really common with road racers, where you'd fall and the handlebar would drive your hand into the ground and the pinky finger would rotate around and expose. The pinky fingers were always reinforced on the outer side, but when the leather spun around, the softer leather on the inner side of your pinky, called the fourchette, would be exposed, and that would just burn right through. And we had a pair of Aras Taichi gloves that were Ben Bostrom's, where he had I think, a tire failure on the banking at Daytona. And he had a very, very violent crash because it was the banking at Daytona. So that's, a couple hundred miles an hour. And his gloves wore through on the thumb side on one. There was a strap that went around the base of the wrist, across your arteries or your veins, where you take your pulse, that held the gloves on, and that abraded through. So one glove ultimately came off, and then the other side, the pinky, spun around and burned him through, and he got hurt pretty good. And I stared at the construction of gloves for a long time, again, doing that, break it down into the granular level, component thinking, looking at how the stuff was sewn. And the obvious idea for that would be to make the third and fourth finger one compartment, right? And that's common, that's the way some snowmobile gloves are made. But one day I was just staring at it and I said, I wonder if this reinforcement could be joined. And, made a couple of drawings and sent it off to a manufacturer over there, and the prototype came back. And it worked well. It felt like a normal glove. There were 2 bridges, one just above the knuckle on your hands, and then a second bridge that was a little farther out on the fingers. And so the idea was, if you wanted a little bit more tactility, you could clip that second one, and the glove would mostly move, but it would still pretty much hold the leather from rotating around. And they initially filed for a patent. Gabriel put his name on the patent, which pissed me off at the time. But that glove, I was really happy with, and he was very kind to me and proud of me for that, and treated me well for it. And, he was showing it to different racers because it was a common – road racing is very different from moto in that there are all of these problems to solve for safety. And it's a much, much higher stakes, and the riders are more serious. The whole end of the sport is serious. They're older, and so when you come up with something that is a viable safety improvement, everybody's interested, whether they're sponsored by another company or not. And we actually made those gloves with blank markings, no logos, and gave them to some other people from some other brands that had problems. I think I remember I got to show it to Biaggi at a trade show, and I think I might have met Alex Crivier, who had one of the most horrific stories about being injured that I had ever heard. But that glove was my, probably the most clever thing I did. And the reason is because, if you're in engineering, they say that the best solutions are simple and elegant. And that thing is not super high tech or anything like that, but it was just looking at it, and figuring out the most simple and obvious thing, just join a couple of panels together and make a really effective solution.
It's funny because I totally know exactly what you're talking about that, because I remember like kind of helping with the racer services a little bit. I would help Davide at the races sometimes. And I remember noticing a lot of those guys had like almost nubs for pinky fingers. And I'm like, what in the heck? Why do they? And it's exactly like what you were talking about. And then the other one that I recall was the kind of the heel slap, when that guy gets thrown off the bike.
Kenny Roberts.
Yeah. And then next thing you know, they slam their heel down on the ground. And so that kind of helped develop those, like you're talking about, the extra plastic in the, I think you actually mentioned that in that Garnet video you just put out, like having extra reinforcement in the heel. And probably a lot of people go like, why would you need that? Well, in that particular case, when you slap your heel down 60 miles an hour on pavement, I mean, yeah, it's pretty gnarly. So, and
that happened quite a bit. And to Alpinestars' credit, they were looking at that, and they built out the back of the GP Tech boot, the heel counter, to stick out more, and they put some padding in that area. And I can vividly remember, I remember them talking about it, and it goes around the office, and all that stuff is kind of cool. And I can remember on a Sunday watching MotoGP on Sky over there, and Kenny Roberts comes off on, the first lap. I think it was at Assen, and he goes, he high sides and he goes flying through the air, and he does that slap. And Randy Mamola was a color commentator, and he jumped in and said, hey, just so you know, that event, that portion of the crash that just happened is something that Alpinestars has specifically designed a boot for. And so, when you're working for a company making that kind of stuff, and you get, huge. Oh man, it just feels so good. That's another thing, I don't know what this is like in marketing, but when you make a product, you go through all the trouble to develop it, and it goes out there and wins a race or shows up in the Olympics or prevents somebody to get hurt. Man, that is a rush that I really enjoyed. That is the coolest thing,
Oh, I can imagine. I don't think we, as a marketing guy, I don't really think we get even remotely close to that. It's something, an actual physical product that you develop. Like, yeah, okay, I can say I signed an athlete, I had the connection, but that's not the same as, being able to say I came up with the airbag system for, road racing. So, that's, yeah, I can see where you're coming from. It's got to feel good.
It does. And I disagree. I think you get a lot of that good feedback from marketing, and it's probably a little bit more instantaneous because you're putting something out to be consumed, and
True.
So you get that feedback instantly, and it's more sparse, more catch as catch can with product, but it does come,
Yeah, that's funny that at the beginning when we first started, you were talking about like I think product guys probably are more of the behind the scenes person, like you're saying. They don't really necessarily get the credit as much, and as Vince Vaughn would say in Swingers, you're the guy behind the guy behind the guy. So,
well, I'm a kind of, it's kind of weird that I have the business that I have, and I do the videos. I'm a natural introvert. I don't, I'm not.
Me too.
Well, you're so laid back and so easy to talk to. I don't buy that. I don't think you're a natural. I think you're more humble than introverted. But I'm definitely a little bit introverted, and so in doing that marketing stuff, when I started to do videos. I don't want to get into this yet because this conversation is flowing well. But when I started to do videos, man, I filmed a whole bunch before I could even stand to look at myself on a monitor.
Yeah, that's funny because I'm the opposite. I just bought my equipment at the end of December, right before Christmas, and then I don't know, figured it out, plugged it all in. I'm like, okay, I guess I'll record one, and January 3rd put one out. So there was no waiting around, I guess. But all right, after Alpinestars, then you made it 4 years. I made it 2, so 4 years is a lot. And then you come back, and then you go back to work for Fox, this time for Shift, right?
That's right. It was two very different companies, and it was Alpinestars was a much more challenging, much better learning experience. I did more stuff at a higher level, but I met more high-level people. All of those things about the experience were better. But I felt like I had two things working against me. One, I feel like I was perhaps a little young and in over my head. And the second aspect was that the company was always kind of running out ahead of its level of structure and organization, which is the way he wanted it, right? But it always felt a bit chaotic. And if you're trying to make product and you're trying to manage a big line with lots of vendors and lots of products and lots of moving parts, you need structure and organization. And so it was just kicking my ass. It was just burning me out. And we had a kid over there. And again, in retrospect, the load, the challenges of dealing with that at the same time was a lot to add to the mix. And my relationship with him soured, and I was starting to have some friction with him. But at one point, I just went to him and said, "Man, I'm not doing. I can't do this for you. I'm doing a bad job, and I apologize. And you need to send me back." And he was super kind and basically moved us back and took good care of us doing that. I had a pretty good position there, had quite a bit of responsibility. And when he moved me back, we didn't really talk about pay or a pay cut. I was expecting to take a pay cut, but and I should have. But he really didn't have anything for me back in the U.S. And so he moved me back and had me settled in a little bit and then let me go. And I kind of saw that coming. I didn't really like it, but I kind of saw it coming, and I actually kind of precipitated. I had brought it on. And in the scope of career changes, that one was pretty good. I mean, to be clear, in the last 30 years, I worked for 4 companies. I worked for Fox. I worked for Alpinestars. I worked for a company up here called Roughwear and Atomic-Moto. And so I haven't changed jobs a lot. But at the same time, you have to be aware, you have to pay attention to where you are in the life cycle of things and where your destiny is taking you and to make adjustments as needed. And I just knew that I was in over my head. I was becoming a limit. I was totally fried, totally fried, like you said, indescribable level. But I went back to the U.S. and then I had kept some communication with the Foxes. And ironically, they remembered the last time that I quit over control. And they had the Shift brand. And that had been Pete's baby. It started off as them watching the development of the Crusty Demons of Dirt facet of the industry and wanting to respond to that. And then some factions of the company saying, no, that's not us. That's totally wrong. Really it was a very visceral and divisive idea to make something to that segment of the market, because there were like core moto guys and there were freestyle guys. And so they played around with making just a pant. They were going to call it the Impala pant, and then the Impala brand, and then eventually they just made Shift. Well, that had been Pete's baby, and he had just crushed it with the advertising, the product, the endorsements, everything. But then he started to do sportswear and it lost his interest. And so it had gone backwards a little bit. And Jeff Fox had told Greg and Pete, fix this, sell this, or close it. And so they said, hey, Brian, do you want to take this on as a task? And I absolutely did. Because working for Fox there's no company. That's one of the reasons why I didn't go looking for another job. I started my own company is because there's no company that I'll ever work for that's going to top that place. And really there's no job that I would ever have that would top the position I had at Shift. But they basically said, take this over and here's the P&L, right? And do what you want. Here's some ideas that we have for it and do what you want. And there's some obvious things that I wanted to play around with, price points and things like that. But the basic theme I had in my head was that Fox was the fantasy. You see their riders, Carmichael at the time, and you look at them and you sort of think, man, that's the fantasy. I really want to aspire to that. And I had this idea that Shift was going to be more the reality, but a good reality, more of almost like a populist type brand to just kind of complement Fox. And so it was a little bit more down to earth in the product design and certainly the advertising. Took us a while, but in that kind of the reality instead of the fantasy thing, we kept trying to find our identity. I found the product strategy pretty quick, but we were just getting our ass kicked by everybody, including Fox, because, it was so well known. It was hard not to stand. It's hard to stand out in their shadow. They cast a really long shadow. But a little ways in, Eric Johnson, who was a great guy for bouncing ideas off of. I was talking to him, and he had this idea to come up with something that was totally core, like surfing, and he described it as I think ride, live, shift, and again, this is like the Forrest Gump thing, because him giving me that seed. I was laying in bed one night and I was like, ride, live, shift, ride, race, live. And I remember sitting up and getting out of bed and going to the table and writing out the ad campaign for it. And that kind of became our, when you have a brand like that, the identity has to flow through everything, right? And we didn't have anything that connected all the aspects of it. We didn't have the aspect of that part that makes it go from just putting some stuff out there to really tying everything together and making it a kind of cause. And that did it.
Man, ride, race, live. I absolutely love that campaign. It's just so on point to where I feel like it was almost ahead of its time, because now I feel like that type of marketing is so popular now, like ride more, ride this, everything is kind of revolving around that living the lifestyle. And then, what was the other thing? Oh, you actually, and I remember during that same period, because I remember you sent me a set of gear at one point, and you were writing, you told me the story of how you would you could have like a beer or whatever, and then go sit down and write some of those ads, because you had those really bitchin' ads that you were putting out during that time. And I think it might have been just for like 1 year, but it was like long form copy where there's like one big paragraph, and it was super heartfelt. And it was like, I think there was one of them was, maybe it was even you, where it was like sitting on the tailgate of back of a pickup truck. And those always just stand out in my mind, because I just thought, man, those were so good.
They were. The idea first was that we were never going to show a person on a track riding, and we were never going to show a person in a helmet. It was always going to be off the bike, always black and white, a little bit of copy. We had a sort of size limit for the amount of words that we could have. And we'd have kind of rough ideas, but then we just kind of wing it. And it was almost like songwriting, like you hear a piece of music and then you got to sit down and write the song to it. But I used to, the first one that you talked about well, the one that you talked about was one of the first ones, and that was, I think, a 6 or 8 pager. And the first part of it, I think, was might have been. No, the Emig one was earlier. I can't remember exactly what the other parts of the ad were, but one was a 2-page spread of a stand-in for me because, as I said, I'm a natural product guy, but being good looking is not my gift. So I had a stand-in for me and my 3-year-old son sitting on the tailgate of my F-150 with a a JR50 Suzuki in the foreground after they had just ridden around a little bit at Metcalf Motorcycle Park. You know, he was 3 years old, and I put him on that bike, and we just followed around with a camera and shot a bunch of stuff. You know, the dad talking to him, and then the one that we took was him sitting on the tailgate of my truck, and I wrote that text in the first person, and it was literally about me riding my mini bike around my cousin's house, and that's something that I want to circle around to later, you know, kind of the sort of more inspirational parts of that. We're kind of getting down into riding and not into the kind of fantasy that is motocross, but more just how you're getting deep into the soul of people that love to ride.
Yeah,
and
exactly. The feelings.
Feelings. And speaking of feelings, I used to have to write those by drinking red wine. I shit you not, specifically red wine, 2 buck chuck. I would go up and sit in the front room of my house late at night, and I'd start drinking. And at about midnight, you know, I think all of the emotions that come up from drinking, you know, red, you know, I love you, man. That shit would come out, and sometimes it would come out, and sometimes it wouldn't, and then I'd have to do it the next day, or we'd push the deadline. We did a bunch of them. I think it was over about 2 years or 2.5 years. The best one that I wrote, in my opinion, was about Billy Laninovich. And I want to tell the story just because it's so awesome. It's just, and it almost makes me get a little emotional just talking about it. So we had started to work with Factory Connection, and I had met a bunch of riders in the past, but I was exposed to them more. And you get these emotional attachments when you're working with them. You know, it's just, you just get to know them, and you kind of pulling for them, and you know, every Monday you want to hear how it went, and so they become 3-dimensional, right? And the Factory Connection team was awesome, and Billy was like just an incredibly talented rider, and in fact, he never really hit the success that he deserves, but he had gotten a couple of injuries, and man, it was bumming him out, and he just kept plugging away. And finally, one race, I want to say it was at San Francisco, and we were all there. He just got a really good start, and he just ripped the race, and he won. And that Ride Race Live ad, which I was always, you know, I always want to talk about the good, but also the bad. And it talked about how he had gotten hurt, and obviously it was affecting him mentally. And he just kept doing it. He kept training, kept practicing, kept riding, and he won. And I can't remember the exact text of it, but I have that. I have that in my little collection of favorite magazines at home on my shelf.
I want to see that. I definitely want. You have to send me a picture of it because I want to read that again. Because yeah, those are. I mean, like I said, I really feel like they were sort of ahead of the time. You know. I feel like back then it was more of that, you know, there was that competitive element. So it was more like almost like punching at your competitors a little bit. Whereas that emotional kind of draw attention to the sport, I don't really think that was in then as much. Now it's everywhere, you know, like everybody's doing that type of marketing these days. And so, yeah, to do it that long ago, pretty cool. And like I said, definitely one of my favorite advertising campaigns. Now so another facet of what you did, was street, right? Didn't you do street apparel?
I did some street apparel. I also did some 4-wheel stuff. I started dabbling in karting a little bit. And
oh yeah, because you made the shoes and stuff, right? Like the shifter cart shoes and driving shoes, right?
the whole gear, the whole lineup, and that was not a commercial success. In fact, that was not the best career decision for me because I was kind of the only guy who was really championing that thing, and it went pretty well. It was profitable and sold pretty well, but it was a drop in the bucket compared to motorcycles, and so it was always hard to sort of justify. But I was kind of, I kind of had my heart in it a little bit, and so I kept pushing it along because I did think that it would have led somewhere. In fact, I'm sure that was going to lead somewhere and lead us to doing some other stuff for other parts of motorsport driving or what have you. I mean, it led us to get in touch with, I met so many famous four-wheel drivers and team owners and kind of watched the whole process of coming in as a brand and being able to, to get a lot of athletes. Like when Nike comes into a sport and they buy everybody up and they get the best athletes and they do it ham-handedly. I can understand how that works right now. We didn't do that. We did come in and get a lot of athletes in a kind of little cottage sport. And the product, the actual driving, karting, kart racing, those personalities was just so fantastic. It was so visual and it made great marketing. And it didn't have a really sophisticated product. So all of that was pretty cool. And we were kind of in that sport, we were the overdog, which was not something that I was accustomed to. I was always accustomed to coming in as the kind of guerrilla fighter and trying to grow and you're taking on the big guys. And this was the opposite. And I learned a lot from that too.
So what's funny is, I mean, not funny, but I mean, it's just so weird that we're talking about Shift, and I think it's finally done, right? Because I mean, I think was it the 2021 line or was it 2022? Maybe they're coming out with, and then that's it, right? It's finally gonna be done. I think that's what I heard.
I don't know. That was something that Fox was prone to do with mountain bike and to some degree Shift. They were always, opening up the faucet and then shutting the faucet off. They're always doing these resets on it. And that was kind of frustrating. So I came in on one of those resets and obviously I benefited from it a bunch. When I was there, it was by far the largest sales volume that it ever had been. And it actually got to be pretty good sized brand. We were selling a lot of product. And then I think that, when I left, I had a couple of these other things and they kind of dialed it back. When I first went there, it was just me and the Fox designers and developers were developing the product. And they were kind enough to put me in a separate building and I hired a whole team. And this time I did it right. Yep, I did. And this time I did it right. Hired a bunch of great guys and we really gelled as a team. And it was, I have to give my props to those people if they tune into this, because we went from no staff, no nothing, to making product that the Fox guys would come and look at and go, man, we like your stuff better. In fact, Pete walked James Stewart into the Shift building one time and he was standing there looking at these big 4x8 blow-ups of the Ride Race Live ads. And he turns to Pete and he goes, hey, man, maybe I need a ride for these guys. And I don't know. I didn't take that as a compliment. I was more worried about how it was going to look, So, shit, James. But after that, I think they kind of lost their way a little bit and tried to go back to a bad version of what it was like in the Emig days, which I knew not to do. And then I think I don't know all the details, but I think they hooked up with Jerome Mage, who you might know.
Yep, I know the name. I think I met him a couple of times. Wasn't he doing One Industry stuff?
He was. And then they started making really good designs. Of course, they never really fully funded it. They just kind of kept it as a a small side brand, but they did do some really cool things. And Jeff Emig was a fantastic guy too. Jeff Emig was involved in it. And so even though it wasn't big, it was really cool. It had found kind of a nice way. But you just can't run a brand like that without a certain number of sales. There's kind of a minimum number of minimum amount of sales that you have to get to really fund all of the different things that you have to do. Silly things like, making catalogs or doing any kind of ads. And so I guess that is something that is causing them to just kind of pull away from it. And the other thing is really the company, the top management of the company has changed. It's not the Fox family anymore. I believe it's Altamont Capital Partners.
Totally different now, isn't it? From what I hear, it's a completely different landscape there now. It's a little more, I don't know, I guess you could say corporate for lack of a better word that comes to mind at the moment, but it's definitely, I bet the processes are different. That's for sure.
I'm sure that it is. I still have many friends there, and it's a very different environment than it used to be. It used to be just absolutely magic, but the sport has matured. You're not going to see a lot of new clothing companies coming up and jockeying for position. There's maybe a few people that could pull it off, but it's a much, much more mature industry and things have changed.
So you have all that product experience, and then you moved to Bend, Oregon and start your own business. So what prompted that? Was it just kind of like we were talking about, like the burnout factor, like in Alpinestars? And I think that's probably inherent in those types of jobs you do. When you're managing that many people, it's so deadline driven, pressure cooker. There's absolute deadlines you have to meet to get things into containers to make it over to the United States or whatever. There's just a lot going on there. So I imagine that factored in.
No, I wasn't burned out at all working for Fox, working on shift. In fact, it was pretty fun. I had kind of I'd gone about as far as I could go with my abilities, and I think that at that point, the signs of the industry leveling off or starting to taper were kind of there. I can remember seeing a couple of KPIs, key performance indicators, showing how things had changed a little bit, and that brand had plateaued, and I was already thinking about the next phase. When I was in Italy, and I was in that, drain the blood phase, I would sometimes sit up late at night and think of places that I wanted to move to where I could have a little bit more control over the next phase of my life, control of my destiny. And that has always been there. And I'm sure I've talked to you about that in the past. And so it's always been kind of on my mind. And by that point in life, I seriously knew that I was not going to have a better job than I had had. And there are some guys, that have bounced from company to company to company, and every 9 months they say, well, yeah, I'm here now. Here's my new card. And I didn't want to do that. I knew that I had to have my own business, that was the next step. And so as soon as before I'd actually left Fox the second time, I was already starting to talk to my wife and kind of put the plan in motion to move. And I wasn't 100% sure where I wanted to go, but I was sure that I wanted to pick the place first and then build the career around it rather than the opposite. And I compliment you on this too, Dale. I think that a lot of people that have talent, I think that we owe it to ourselves to try and go out there and make your own thing, to try and do something that is your own, that you can make your own mark on. And that was always on my mind. So we did a little tour and looked at a couple of places. The foothills of the Sierras was one place, but then we drove through Bend, Oregon. We drove through Bend, Oregon. And I had this place on my radar since the late 90s. And in fact, there was a guy that was an ad sales rep for a bicycle company who lives here. And I can remember back in probably 96, him telling me he lived in some little town in Oregon, and it was a real pain to get out of, but it was really cool. And it was Bend. It was this place. But I just decided to move up here and kind of set about the next phase of life. And I had saved, and I did well in my house. And so at first I took a job when I came up here. I worked for a company called Roughwear, who is the motorcycle apparel industry model for dog gear. Sounds totally strange. And when I stepped into it, it was totally natural. The dogs are the athletes, and they do all kinds of like really crazy stuff. People in places, in California or in urban areas, you don't see it as much. But when you come to a place like where you're at or where I'm at now, people take the dogs out into the backcountry and they just do cool stuff with them. And they need specific gear for that. For example, there's the owner's dog would run along the river while he paddled, and there's a lot of lava rock up here, and it would just destroy his feet. And so they made shoes with Vibram soles for dogs. Sounded crazy. But I did that for about a year, and I knew that that was kind of going backwards. And so I gave him my notice, and I eased out of there. And very careful to say I eased out of there with grace, and still great friends. In fact, one of them is a customer. And I just started working on what I was going to do next. And so that begot Atomic-Moto.
That's so cool that you said. I find it interesting that you're like, I picked the place, and then from that place, I would decide what I would do next. And I'm like, which kind of like makes sense, because you're in a location that to me is, I would say, like where I'm at, where you're at, anywhere in the northwest part of the United States is definitely an adventure riding mecca, if you want to call it that, because it's just
riding mecca.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, even more so for that adventure side, and so I guess would you say that's part of your decision to focus on that segment specifically?
Absolutely, without a doubt. The easiest way to make products for people that they will like is to be the target customer. And so this was totally, totally natural, and kind of went back to my roots. I was never really a hardcore motocross guy, and I'm not a really good motocross rider, but I could ride pretty well in the woods. And I grew up in New England, and that's what you did back then. You rode in sand pits or trails or what have you, and then a bunch of street stuff too. But that was, and first of all, in general, I like riding, all kinds of riding. And I especially like the best aspects of each kind of riding. So in Italy, it was mountain passes, which were freaking awesome. And here, I can still remember the first time I looked at this place on Google Maps, and I zoomed out and I just saw these little lines, which are Forest Service roads going in every direction. And I sold my street bike right away. And that was before I had actually even moved up here. But the dual sport and adventure riding, plated dirt bike riding, just kind of backcountry exploring here is phenomenal. And so that is who I speak to and who I sell to, and that's by design.
And obviously, products. I mean, it just seems like a natural thing. Obviously the retail is tough. If you've never really gone full all in on retail, I'm sure there's a huge learning curve on all kinds of aspects of that. Whether it was building the website and managing your content and all of that kind of stuff. But I mean, it seems like it was a pretty natural move for you, because a lot of things you could take for granted, like being able to talk about and break down a product, is going to be pretty simple for you. So, and I feel like that's what you've really done a good job at. When I wrote some of those pieces for you, I was kind of doing a little bit of research, and I Googled a few things, and you came up, in the top 5 for a lot of products. So I was like, man, you've really done some good stuff to draw attention to your website as someone who's a specialist in that area, which I think makes a huge amount of difference when someone's out there going to spend a lot of money on a product, which, as we know, ADV can happen quickly. So,
right. Well, yeah. That's an extension of the question you asked. Why this this segment, and I told you it's because I kind of like it and understand it. And it's really not at that point for me. I'm a lousy marketer, right? I'm a good product guy, and I try to speak clearly and not overhype things. I try not to be bombastic, and there's a real language to being informational rather than promotional, right? But if you understand the product and you use it and you kind of understand the context that it fits into, it's really easy to speak to your audience, and it also gives you the advantage of having more depth of information on it, you know?
Yep.
And so, first of all, me being the kind of nerd and control freak about products and stuff like that in general, you know, I just kind of dive down and look at that stuff. And the other thing is because I sort of understand the context of how it works. That's a benefit. And the third thing I'd mentioned very early in the podcast, the third thing is that you have this sort of whiteboard in your mind of products that fit into different positions, right? More street, more dirt, high end, low end, more cold weather, more warm weather. And I have a good sort of spatial awareness of how that theoretical thing works. The other thing you said that I want to circle back to is, you know, I went in on this motherfucker. I'm Captain Cook. I burned the ship on this endeavor. I came up here and started this in 08. I incorporated in, I think, 07. But I went all in on this with a wife and 2 kids and a house and 2 dogs. And I mean, I just threw everything. I bet it all on Brian. And that is not a strategy that people should do. It worked out well for me, but when I look back on it, I don't advocate that people take that kind of big risk. You know, I did have a pretty good amount of training, a pretty good background. I learned a ton from Jeff Fox and the Fox family, Greg and Pete. So I was pretty well equipped, but I really did go all in on this. And it's worked out well. I mean, I've been doing it officially, you know, outside of the garage. I was in the garage until fall of 2009. And then in fall of 2009, I moved into my first commercial space. So I've been at it for a while, but I did go all in on it. I want to make that clear.
Well, I think one of the reasons that I think that, to me, when I like watch some of your videos and you talk about product, is it's the way you talk about it. To me, you come across as an authority, and so immediately I feel like I trust what you're saying when I'm watching the videos. And so to me, I think that's a skill that you have that you might not even know that, but like to me, that's something that I get out of you when I watch like a video of you explaining a product. So kudos to you for that, man.
Thank you very much, Dale. That is super kind, and it actually feels really good. If you've listened to your own content, I don't know, when I look at my own content, it's terrifying. It's hard. So I'm not getting that out of it. You know, it's like the last thing you're thinking is, "Wow, I'm doing a really good job." You're just kind of horrified with all the little mistakes that you're making.
Oh yeah, at least my biggest one is my wife's always she's the one that's like, luckily she can tell me whatever, you know, and I'm okay with it, but she'll be like, yeah, like she'll make fun of some of my little quirks and ticks, you know, things of my language ticks, but like I'm just like, you know, that's who I am. I'm 52 and I'm not going to change now, you know. So, and why would I want to, you know, like I'm not going to put on some kind of a false facade just for this show, you know.
they really do know how to find our wives. Mine is the same way. That story is perfectly familiar to them. And they really do know exactly where the gap in the armor is, right? Just say that one little thing that just totally deflates you. Like, yeah, look at this video I did. And she'll just say, what's up with your eyebrows? And it's like, fuck.
What's with the nervous what's going on with your face? You know? Like
and you know, it's like She knows how to do it perfectly. I know exactly what you're talking about. Looking at your own content is not really reassuring. Actually, that's not true. I find after it's had some time and you see it, in the rearview mirror a ways back, then it can look pretty good. But when you're doing it and you're just looking at it fresh, it always is pretty. It's not comfortable to look at.
I hear you. I'm totally with you. Well, there's one more thing I want to bring up because I know I've taken enough of your time today, but one other thing I thought was really cool, and I didn't even realize this till the other day. Maybe I did, but it's been a couple of years, is that I think you purchased like what was left of the Griff's gear brand. And so you have the Griff's website up. And I mean, if there was ever a time, if I could ever persuade you to come, back out of the woodwork and create some gear, I think it'd be so rad to do something like that with Griff's because I mean, I'm real familiar with it. You're familiar with it. Probably a lot of younger people out there are definitely not going to be familiar with it, but Griff's was definitely a cutting edge brand that really sort of changed. I guess you could say it was the transition from like true leather pants to, something else, like an actual material besides leather. So yeah, tell me a little about that. Cause I think it's really cool. And I'm hoping someday that you still decide to pull the trigger on something like that, because I think it'd be super, super cool. Whether or not it'd be successful, I don't know, but it'd be fun. That's when you have a bunch of money to burn up, right?
Griff's, yes, exactly. Griff's was the first company. Actually, they're credited as being the first company to make motocross pants out of nylon instead of leather. They are the first company in the motorcycle industry, first company in the world to use Cordura, DuPont Cordura, in the motorcycle industry. They were launched in Connecticut in 1974, made in the USA, all made in the USA. And they existed for around 11 or 12 years. And at one time, I think they were the largest manufacturer of motocross pants, but most of their sales were done with the bike brands as private label. In other words, you get Griff's pants with a Honda logo, a Yamaha logo, a Suzuki logo, Yamaha, Can-Am, KTM, Mako, Penton, on and on and on. And I have a huge collection of most of that stuff. I had seen it when I worked at a motorcycle dealership back in Connecticut. And I actually remember I called the guy and tried to buy a set of pants. And I was a young kid. And I remember him yelling at me and me getting real mad for the way I was treated about it. It's kind of funny. But they just looked special. And the reason they looked special is because they actually stood for something. They made a lot of stuff, but they weren't a brand with the typical marketing focus. All of the kind of soul of the brand was on the integrity of the product. And they were really durable. They have a reputation for being really sturdy.
Oh yeah, they're bulletproof,
Yeah. And they had gone out of business, and around the time when I was here and I was kind of sitting around trying to figure out what to do, I had two things going on. I had already started Atomic-Moto a little bit, but I had remembered the brand and looked it up and tracked down the owner, which was not easy to do, and had an attorney write me up a purchase agreement, flew back to the East Coast, flew back to New England, and bought it from him. I remember I met him at the fifth floor of a building in Bridgeport, Connecticut, which is not a nice town, on this building that was pretty much falling down around him. He was the last tenant, and it had one of those old school elevators, with the sliding metal bar doors.
Mm-hmm.
And it was
like a
just
freight elevator.
Exactly. And the place was in a bad state. He had moved on to making some other product then. I think he was making clothes for UPS at the time. But he had this back room, and the back room, the windows were out of it. There were pigeons nesting in the rafters of the room. And it looked like you had just taken boxes and rolls of fabric and sewing machines and random junk and just thrown it into a pile. It was literally just a pile. And we sifted around through that pile and pulled out as many samples as we could. We got some cool stuff too. I got a set of Ricky Graham leathers, which is another story. But I pulled all that stuff out and packed it all up and came back to Oregon and registered the trademark. And I've been selling some stuff. I haven't really pushed it or tried to develop really sophisticated technical product. I've just kind of sold some memorabilia and some accessories and things like hoodies and jackets and hats to people. But it really needs to be fully developed and resurrected. And this is interesting. It actually has a Fox tie too, because when Fox went from making hard parts and then the bottom collapsed out of the shock market and Jeff decided to make clothing, which is back in 76, I think. His first 2 productions of Moto X Fox pants were made by Griff's. And I have a pair. That's
what I thought. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a pair of them. I paid $700 for them on eBay. Yeah,
wow.
No lie. But it really needs to be kind of sorted out, like the question that I had in my mind about shift. What is the soul of it? And I have a pretty good idea of that, but that really has to sort of flow through all of the aspects of it, not just a few ads in the product, like how the company fits into the market and things like that. And the other thing is, I've wanted to start it a couple times and I've started working on it and I have all kinds of designs for it and, business plans and things like that. But every time I would start to do that, either I would get overwhelmed with the time required to keep Atomic-Moto going, or I'd get a little uncomfortable about the state of the industry. And so I backed off. But I have set a date where Atomic-Moto is going to go into some other hands. I don't know exactly what that's going to look like. I've got a couple options there. But Atomic-Moto is going to go into some other structure, I'll call it, and then I'm going to focus on Griff's, and I have some ideas for how to do it. And at that point, man, I'm going to call up everybody that I know, including you, and ask for every bit of advice and every favor that I can pull. So hopefully I stay in your good graces.
I think you could almost take the original designs and just put those out to begin with, because I think they're so cool and they're real minimalist, and that's in now again. So I just feel like even if it was, I don't know. I think you could probably just roll that stuff out and it would automatically probably sell, and then kind of create your own designs. But man, I would love to see it come back again, because there's definitely a lot of history. And shoot, I think somebody needs to write that story. Sounds like you're the right person for it too. Sounds like a meta feature.
No, someone else with a gift for that thing. I have no marketing game. Someone such as yourself with a gift for that thing needs to write that story, especially you, since you have a tie to wearing the product. And I have some photos of you doing it. And I have the original patterns. This is crazy. I have all of the original paper patterns for their line. It's 3 massive boxes full. And I did, one time I came close to getting, I wouldn't say close, but I was probably about a third of the way in to getting them made and getting them made in the U.S. And that the production end of it kind of fell apart. It seems like every time I have, I have started to do it, some other distraction came up. But both my kids are out of the house here in about a month, and
well, there you go.
And I have a lot of extra energy and time, so I think that's kind of one of my things. And I would hope that it would go well. I don't know. We'll have to see. It's the market is really tough. The product makes perfect sense. Even now. It totally fits into this time, but it's a tough business,
Yep. Well, I hope it comes to fruition, because I, for one, think it would be super cool. I think there's brands out there like Fast House and, that are kind of starting to have that vibe where it's just more about the riding, kind of like the Ride Race Live campaign. And so that stuff seems so trendy. And a lot of times it's all about timing. And so when the time is right, I have no doubt you'll make it you'll make it cool. So really appreciate you coming on today, Brian, and sharing some of your stories. I mean, you've obviously done a lot to contribute to our sport. And if there's any last words out there or words of advice you'd like to share with some of my listeners about if anybody's looking to break into power sports and maybe product development in particular, feel free to share. Put you on the spot, huh?
No, not at all. I think that there's a lot of info, a lot of advice for people that are looking to do that. What I have is something different that I think relates a little bit to you and to me. Is if you're in the power sports industry already, and you feel like your career path is unclear or not moving forward, I encourage people to try to come up with ways to start their own thing, to do their own thing. And it's really hard. It's a tremendous, tremendous risk. And it doesn't always even work out. I've been fortunate enough, and you're fortunate enough that it has. It doesn't always work out. But I think that the industry needs more entrepreneurs, more fresh minds, not so much derivative stuff, more new energy for sure. And I encourage people to think about that as a next step. I think that's something that when you do it, when you know this, when you have those good days, it's better than any job. The bad days can be pretty heavy, but when you have a good day for your own company, or you do something for your own company, it is a feeling that is pretty sweet and pretty hard to find elsewhere in life. And the second thing is, I watched a bunch of your podcasts, read a bunch of your stuff in the last few days. I've listened to some other stuff too. I love the Skylar Howes one. I loved hearing your comments on the recreational riding movement. And I am sincerely shocked at how fast and hard you have come out of the gate with the Dirtbuzz podcast, and you are absolutely kicking ass with this thing. And keep it up, Dale. I'm proud of you.
I appreciate that. It's a lot of fun, honestly, being able to share these stories, of people like you is it's super rewarding. And to go back to what you said about owning your own business, I completely concur. And that was well said, that when I do have a good day, it is different. I just realized that when you said that, I'm like, gosh, he's right. Because there are lows. It's a lot more of a probably roller coaster. It might feel a little more bipolar, our days, but when it's good, you do feel like you won, and so, yeah, great observation on that. And I really appreciate the kind words, because that's what I'm hoping to do. I started out, I didn't really have much, many intentions with this, but I feel like it sort of found its voice in exactly what we're doing right now, and being able to share stories like what you experience with, these iconic companies is fun to share. So thanks for your kind words. And, thanks again for coming on, man. Really, really cool. I think I'll definitely have to have you back again, because there's too many other stories that we could probably do multiple episodes on just specific topics. But so you definitely have an open invite to come back anytime. If you have some ideas for some subjects, please let me know. And other people, by the way, because then you have some connections too that you probably were like, oh, you should have this person on because they have an incredible story. So definitely pass those along to me if you want.
I will do that for sure.
Brian, again, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. Always a pleasure talking with you. Always a good time. And that's it for this episode, everyone. Remember to be kind to each other, listen to good music, enjoy life on two wheels, and keep the buzz rolling.
Thanks all.
Thanks for listening.